Greetings, Black family, and welcome to On the Wake Up Radio. I am your host, DC Radical One, and you have entered the center. Shout out to our wonderful producer, Cindy Ashby. You can check us out on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and iHeartRadio at On the Wake Up Radio. Also, you can check us out at onthewakeupradio.com. And lastly, but certainly not least, you can listen via YouTube via the DC Radical One YouTube page. And as I get started, I would like to thank everyone who has recently subscribed to the DC Radical One YouTube page. We have had over 30 people subscribe in the last couple of weeks since I actually activated the page. So I am grateful for that. And I see people are starting to stream into the building. Greetings to BB Fahodier, man. Greetings to Sister Simba. Greetings to Sister Vanessa. Our wonderful producer Cindy Ashby has joined us. Greetings to Sister Nina, who I believe is out on the west coast. And so, which means I guess that's still morning time out there. So we appreciate your support, sister. So yeah, we're trying to build the DC Radical One YouTube page. We were the On the Wake Up Radio page was banned from streaming for a while, well, from posting anything for a while. I believe that's back up. So we're gonna get back to it, doing what we normally do. So this week topic, which we will get into shortly, is allow more people to get into come into the proverbial building, if you will. We're going to get into hip hop. We're going to talk about hip hop. We're going to talk about the effects of hip hop on black culture, and we're going to do an examination of something that if you are if you're under 50, then you're familiar with hip hop at least to some degree. It has affected your life if you are, especially if you grew up here in America. And so, something that we don't really talk about too often. But before we do that, I just wanted to thank everyone who has donated to the Cash App, the DC Radical One Cash App, and thank everyone who has supported and people who retweet and people who send out links and all those things. People who show up all the time for these podcasts, these discussions. You know, in the wake of this COVID thing, I personally like to actually, I like to do my interaction with the people directly. I like to speak to the people directly. So doing this was kind of new, and I just want to thank everybody that has supported and find value in the discussions that we have. Because what I find is that I try to talk about things that people won't talk about. I try to talk about things that aren't necessarily popular. I like to bring up the sacred cows to see if they should be slaughtered or set free. And this is one of those shows because, like I said, we've all grown up listening to hip hop. If you're in my generation, you literally grew up listening to hip hop because I was having a discussion with somebody and I said, wow, we're literally the hip hop generation. Like, hip hop came about right around the time I was born. And I thought it was I thought it was a younger art form. And so I really had no idea. I was measuring from the time that it became commercially viable, which was a mistake. And so after doing a little research, I realized that hip hop is older than I thought, and that that kind of changes the dynamics which brought it into existence from my point of view. And so we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get into the history, and then as we get into the history, we'll move forward and talk about how it has affected us, and how certain people being part of the commercialization of hip hop has how that altered the course, I believe, of hip hop. And so looks like we have few people here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Of course, when we're talking about hip hop, when I'm talking about hip hop, I'm not just talking about the music, because I think people get confused that haven't been around. People talk about the music aspect, but they don't talk about the entirety of the original art form as it was. And I think a lot of people, you talk about hip hop, like nowadays, no one, well, not no one, but very few people do breakdancing. And so most people have never seen it, may well have never heard of it. But that was that's what is a, how can I put it? It's an essential part of the art form. So you can't really have hip hop without breakdancing. You can't really have hip hop without, of course, rapping. You can't have hip hop without DJing. And the fourth pillar of hip hop, if you will, would be greetings, Lord Bill. The fourth pillar of hip hop would be graffiti art. And so when you actually look at the history of hip hop, what you're really looking at, and from my perspective, is almost like a neo how can I say it? It's like a rebirth of culture that happens in the black community every few decades. And it's really interesting when you look at it, because this is a movement that starts amongst youth at a time, at right at the end of a revolutionary time amongst black people. So if you really look at black American history, and we're gonna get to the founder of hip hop, because this part is funny in and of itself. But starting in the 50s, you start to see black people awaken and get a new spirit and start to mobilize and organize and fight against white supremacy again, you know. And as the 50s rolls into the 60s, the youth of the 60s take it and ramp it up to another level. And that's where you get the Panthers and Stokely Carmichael, Snick, and all of that, following behind Malcolm X and everything like that. We all know that history. But what's so interesting is coming on the back end of that, where you have the Panthers are still active and these types of things, you have this movement which springs up amongst youth in New York City. And it's interesting because it starts so simple. Like when you read the history, it's almost shocking how simple this is, and how it has gone and taken over everything when it started so simple. And when I say it started so simple, so the founder of hip hop, according to all credible sources, is DJ Kool Herc. DJ Kool Herc, government name Clive Campbell, was the son of Jamaican immigrants. And I believe he was born in Jamaica, if I'm not mistaken. And basically what happened is that he would have parties at his house in the Bronx, back to school jams. And these back to school jams that he had, what made them different, or what kind of became the foundation of the culture, or as they say, I call it a subculture. It's not a true culture. Is that he would take the breaks of records, and if you listen to old school records, because I don't listen to a lot of new music now, I don't actually think I hear breaks. But if you listen to a James Brown record, for example, James Brown will have he'll have the regular beat, he'll have the regular melody, he'll have the vocals over it, and then he'll have what he called a bridge, and then that will allow someone to do a solo, or you just have the drum track or something like that, right? And different black genres of music had this, and it's something you started to see in like disco, because disco being a dance music, then they would just have long parts where it's just the music playing. So DJ Kool Herc, he took this, and he had two turntables, like the DJs in New York at the time had in the club DJs had, and he would take and he would play the break on one, and then play the break on the second to extend the break, and then bring it back and play the break on the first turntable again, and could take and extend just the break beat for long intervals of time, and that would allow the people to dance. And then of course that's the foundation of the word break dancing, right? So when he did this, he started travel around the city, go to different parks and stuff. He had this big giant sound system, and that's how he became popular. Now the thing about it is that this was happening in 19. This started in 19, I believe 1973. So this is not something. This is one of those things like, and you have to be old enough to remember this. There was at a time where different regions had different music. So if you were in the 70s, even up to maybe even up to the early 90s, yeah, I'll say up to the early 90s, mid 90s, if you would travel up and down the East Coast, for example, right? If you would travel up and down the East Coast, you could tell where you were by the type of music that was being played. If you were in DC, you would hear go-go. If you were in Baltimore, you would hear house. If you were in Jersey, weirdly enough, and I don't know about Philly. I don't know what they had going on back in the day. But then Philly had a different house. I mean, not Philly, Jersey, you had a different house. And then you get to North Jersey, you start hearing the hip hop. Then in New York and Connecticut, you heard the hip hop. And if you go down south, especially in the 80s, you would hear bass music, which is just different from all the other stuff that you heard going north. When you go down south, you hear something different. And so each region had their own style of music completely. Not that what developed later, of course, is each region had their own style of rap music. But previous to that, people had their own style of music altogether. To the point that you would see it in black music where even like West Coast funk artists, the music sounds different from East Coast funk artists. And what ended up happening, a lot of people don't realize, is that kind of affected what people would use later to sample, right? So on the East Coast, you heard a lot of James Brown samples. Later on the West Coast, you would hear a lot of Parliament samples. And the music just kind of got divided up where the different regions preferred different styles of music, right? But getting back to DJ Kool Herc and getting back to the foundation of this thing. So him utilizing and extending the breakbeat and having those parties in the South Bronx is, by all accounts, the foundation of hip hop. Thus, that means that the founder of hip hop is in essence a Jamaican immigrant, right? So the roots of hip hop, you could say, come from Jamaica because of him. Then other people saw him doing it, and then they started to do it. Now, what's deep is I had always heard the story about everyone saying about DJ Kool Herc and the DJing and the technique and how he did that, and that being the foundation of breaking. I didn't know that he had terms and phrases and things to get people to dance and stuff, and would talk on the mic, and that became the foundation of rapping. And then eventually he had a partner that would take over that part, and that kind of led to the rapping aspect of hip hop. And then I'm sure, but no one says it, which is weird to me. But I'm sure that the spoken word poetry and things like that that was coming out of the '60s would eventually affect the rap and kind of change and make it more to make it more of an art form than it initially was. Because from everything I've read, like it initially was literally just talking on the mic and trying to exhort the people to dance and things like that, which you see DJs do all the time. But of course, that's a far difference from doing that to Rakim Allah in 1986. So, one of the things I read when DJ Kool Herc was talking about his experiences, and a BB Fahodier man said, explain why music is so integral to black people's existence, movement, and evolution. I'm going to get to that, brothers, and remind me. So, when Herc started to do this and other people started to see it and emulate it, and then of course what happens is you try to better the person that's doing it, and then it starts to spread. One of the things I found interesting is that he said that one of the groups that was integral in him being able to do what he did was he made a connection with the Five Percenters, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths. So, again, if you're familiar with New York culture in the late '60s forward, you understand how foundational the Nation of Gods and Earths are to hip hop. Now, I knew this, but I didn't know his personal connection with them. So, what DJ Kool Herc is documented as saying is that being an immigrant, he had a hard time. He had a difficult time assimilating into American culture, and that it was the brothers in the 5%, which is another name for the Nation, Gods, and Earths, the 5%ers. I'm sure some of you have heard that. They were the ones that kind of, in essence, took him under their wing and showed him around and gave him protection and things like that, and kind of like gave him his pass into, in essence, into, if you will, Black American culture. And that was before he started doing the parties. And so what's interesting is if you listen to a lot of the old names, you hear a lot of 5% lingo and names put into it. Now, another group that would be greatly influenced and influenced early hip hop was Zulu Nation. When Greek Bambaataa, and he calls himself Africa Bambaataa, but here we call him Greek Bambaataa. I may get into that, I may not. When he reformed, I don't know if he reformed the black space or he came out of the black space and formed Zulu Nation, and he took some teachings from a lot of different people, including the 5%. Hip hop became a big part of what they were about. And then that helped spread their popularity, and then their popularity helped spread hip hop. So now you have two major youth oriented movements helping to push a third youth oriented movement in a city of, I guess at the time, 6 million people. And this was at a time, so we're talking about the era of New York where I believe New York was going bankrupt in the 70s. So we're talking about poverty, we're talking about violence and things like that. And one of the things that's interesting that people always forget is that breakdancing was used as a way to settle quote unquote gang disputes in the early 80s. So I'm trying to think. Okay, the movie representation of this that you can see if you watch, I believe it was Beat Street. It's a movie that came out sometime in the early 80s. I can't remember when. I was young, very young when it came out. But I remember the movie. And I think my mother actually took me to see that movie, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, but in Beat Street, you can see the representation of the utilization of hip hop to diffuse what would have been gang warfare. Now, what we have to understand is what I'm saying, gang warfare in this sense, we're talking about a time where very few people had guns. The proliferation of guns had not happened. While heroin had proliferated in New York, crack was not on the scene yet. And so the youth were using this as a tool to settle gang disputes. So, and I'm saying that for a reason as we get further into the discussion. So instead of, let's say, you have this group over here from Brooklyn and you have this group from the Bronx and they don't like each other, or this group from the Bronx and this one from Harlem and they say, hey, don't come up here. You have those, however those situations start. Although, let's be honest, a lot of times it starts over women, but that's another discussion. Anyway, the music was at the time and the dancing was used in order to diffuse situations which could result in someone being hurt and or dying. Right? No one told the youth to do that. The youth were doing that themselves. As the music spreads across the city, it gains the attention of record labels. So the part that's interesting is the first commercially viable hip hop record, Rapper's Delight, was a sister that signed them and recorded it. And they recorded it to Sheik's Good Time, the breakbeat of Sheik's Good Time. We talk about the breakbeat. Now, I'm not actually sure how that happened. I don't know if I'm gonna assume they had samplers back in the day, but I know Stevie Wonder was doing some stuff with mechanical instruments and things like that, and doing some real what was high end tech stuff in that same era. But I'm not gonna lie, I didn't research to see if they used a sample or I don't know what they did. Anyway, I know they used the breakbeat from Sheik's Good Time, a disco record, to make Rapper's Delight. And this was the beginning of commercially viable hip hop. This was also, of course, the changing of hip hop culture. Because what happens? Well, what happens is that what are people getting paid to do? Are people getting paid to dance? Or are people getting paid to make the music? No, people begin to get paid to make the music. So the rapping and the DJing becomes more prominent, right? Because at first the DJs were the ones who were known. So a lot of times people played in clubs or they made tapes and people knew who they were. And so they were the ones to commercially get support. As time went on and once the music started to get more popular and people started looking for rappers, then the rappers took preeminent. Now, a way you can see this is that people like DJ Marley Marl was known way more in his heyday than any rapper. DJ Kool Herc was known way more than any rapper. In fact, there were no rappers when he was popular, right? But as the commercialization comes in, then the rapping part is the part that takes preeminence. Now, when we talk about the commercialization of hip hop, here's where we get to the point where things begin to change and we get to see how and why. One of the first and probably longest premier hip hop labels was, of course, Def Jam Records. Now, the interesting part is Def Jam was initially, unofficially, started by Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin is, y'all can fill in the blanks, you know what it is. Rick Rubin is a tiny hat. Rick Rubin initially was doing punk rock music. Eventually, Rick Rubin, God, he met it. I can't remember who it was, but it was a DJ he met. He started working with him. That DJ started teaching him about hip hop. Eventually, he would meet Russell Simmons, known as Rush at the time, who was doing artist management or whatever, and they collaborated. They cooked. They threw the other guy out that had introduced them to. I don't know how that worked, but you know, business is business. It's ruthless. And then that was the foundation of Def Jam Records. And Def Jam Records became the premier hip hop label. One of the other people that was around at that time that was brought in early in that process was Leor, or as I like to call him, Liar Cohen. Now, who is Liar Cohen? He's another what? Another little hat. Now we can see that at the foundation of the commercialization of the music that was started by black Jamaican immigrant and featured largely black and Latino youth, became infiltrated early by hats. And Sister Vanessa says, why do the gatekeepers keep allowing all these other people into hip hop, then crowning them as ghosts? Well, I'm gonna get to that. Here's one of the things. Where something starts will determine how it grows, right? If hip hop had started in Washington D.C. in the 70s, there would be no white people in hip hop. Go-go started in the 70s, and I don't know of a single, I mean, I'm sure there's like one guy somewhere, but I don't know of a single European artist that does go-go. Go-go never got as big as hip-hop. It stayed local. It stayed regional, right? So Miss Africa Root says prior to that we had Sugar Hill Game, and bebop was the earliest form of recorded rap. Okay. And what was I saying? So yeah, go-go stayed regional. Hip hop became national. Go-go stayed regional because you had to experience go-go. Like you had to go to it. Hearing it on the tape wasn't the same as going to it and being involved in it. And so it stayed what it was for years. Hip hop, on the other hand, could be transported, and the thing that's interesting is that as it went to different places, people could take it and make it their own and change it in whatever way that they saw fit. Now back to the question at hand. Because it was in New York, it was already, because New York is what it is, and so many different cultures and things like that. Hip hop was at the beginning multiracial. So it was never a black art form if we're looking at not just the rapping, but the rapping, the DJing, the breakdancing, and the graffiti. Some of the best breakdancers were Latino. Some of the best graffiti artists were Latino. So it was never, in being completely honest, especially us as quote unquote black Americans, it was never ours to begin with, which is weird to say, but it's true. But the interesting part is the commercialization of it was ours at the beginning. Because, and I forget the sister's name, I believe it was Sylvia Rome, but the sister that signed Sugar Hill and made that record, that was the beginning of the commercialization. Had they had a monopoly on it, many things may have been different from how they were. But because the hats were in early on the commercialization, as far as Rick Rubin, Lyra Cohen, and others, this is where you get the point where you can change the culture, because the people who are responsible for making the money, for paying people, the people that are responsible for the distribution, the people that are responsible for getting it on the radio, are not necessarily black people. Why is that important? It's important because once another group of people have the power to determine that, what takes place is they can change the direction of the music because of the money. Right? And this is something that we will see in the late 80s and early 90s. Now, remember, one of the things I was talking about when I was talking about the history is that it would go to different places and different people would make it theirs. So, the things that people in New York were talking about were different from what we were here on the West Coast. When Ice-T started talking, and he did his song 6 in the Morning, and talking about police kicking in your door at 6 in the morning, police brutality, and talking about hustling and pimping and all that stuff. Most New York artists weren't talking about that at that time. There were a few, but not many. So then that leads us into the whole NWA thing, starting approximately in 1987. Now, what's so interesting is that as NWA is starting, before they get big in 87, Public Enemy is becoming more popular as they change their sound. If you listen to Public Enemy's old records, they had a very old school and rock based sound. When 88 came, they did Nation of Millions, they changed their sound, they added more funk, they kept some of the rock, and they made the music very dense and aggressive and hard, right? But then put something political over the top of it. It changed the entire dynamic of what people thought they could say in the music, right? At that same time, weirdly enough, NWA was making songs like Dope Man and other songs dealing with the reality of what they're seeing on the West Coast. But what got them most popular was their most political song, weirdly enough, which was, of course, F the Police. Why? Because that's something that all youth, if you're black in America, can relate to over multiple generations. And so that was, in essence, their most overtly political song, and yet that was the song that made them the most popular. And then, people heard Straight Outta Compton and things like that. Eazy-E's album had come out before. It was popular, but it wasn't as popular nationally. It just kind of laid the groundwork for when the group came out. But at the same time, this is going on, right? We always miss this part. Luther Campbell in Miami is bringing strip club culture to hip hop. Now, when I remember seeing and hearing Luke, he probably had already been out for years before that, in the two Live crew. And I'll say maybe 87. Whenever somebody look it up, whenever the song Me So Horny came out, and many of you will remember this, the video jukebox, right? So when Luke started making that song, he had Me So Horny. He had some other songs. I just never liked Luke. I just never vibed with that whole thing. So I can't even remember the other songs. But the videos made that music very, how can I put it? It made that music go national. Because you had things like the video jukebox, I think that's what it was called, where people could call in and somebody saying it came out in '88. Is that you saying Luke came out in '88? If so, let me know. When the video jukebox thing happened, got big, it came to my area. For those that don't know, what you could do is you could look at the you could go to the channel, whatever it was, and you could order a video, and they would play the video. So this is at a time where you didn't have to. Thanks, Sister Vanessa. Anyway, won't be repeating that. Um, wow, I forgot, man. I forgot how vulgar Luke was. Anyway, but when people no, let me stop lying. And Sister Miss African Root said 99 cents to play. It was really 99 cents. Wow. I mean, so long ago I forgot. I just could not. In my house, I knew even that 99 cents would be noticed, so I never played that 99 cents. And our wonderful producer said it was on Billboard for 30 weeks in '89. Wow, so half the year. You could see whichever video you wanted. So I remember when the jukebox first came out, you would just see, whoever was hot at the time, Rakim and KRS One and Public Enemy and whoever the case may be. When Luke came out, oh no, the entire structure of that thing changed. You were getting back to back Luke videos to the point where I believe they had to change the format so you couldn't keep ordering the same thing over and over and over. So you gotta think about it. You have a generation of boys who are coming into they're in their teenage years. Here comes a dude rapping with a bunch of women that he got out the strip club. If you're a teenager like me, you didn't even know the strip club existed. So, this is mind blowing, in essence. And in essence, what it was, without nobody ever saying it, it was literally and for 1987, 88, 89, this was the equivalent of, if we're being honest, what they call it? Softcore pornography, whatever the term is. Y'all know what I'm saying. That's what it was. We have to understand we're talking about 30 years ago. So the whole dynamics and the culture and what people thought was acceptable was completely different from now. Like now, no one would even notice. I think weirdly enough, I think Luke would be even bigger now, not because of he had more talent or because of the internet and stuff like that. I think he'd just be bigger, and they were big then, so big that in fact that they had cases that went to the Supreme Court about whether or not he could say what he was saying and whether or not he could perform in certain places. This was a big thing, and we seem like we all just kind of forget it. This was huge because what happened is that Luke's music jumped out of the pond of black people and started getting popular amongst white people. And then when white people saw that, then that's when they responded and tried to shut him down. The same thing would happen with in NWA, but it wasn't the people, it was the police. NWA, when they made F the Police, a lot of police were upset. A lot of police targeted them, and they got a letter from the FBI about the record. So when we look at the history of hip hop and don't think how consequential it was and how it changed things, we just, we're forgetting the history at hand. But the question that I started with, the title of the show, as we move further and further up into the history to now is, did it destroy black culture? Well, here's the thing that's deep. Like, it's really deep. Over the years, as black people here in America, our culture tends to evolve, change, grow, expand, sometimes even contract over the years that we've been here. When music, when music, in a very real sense, like anyone that actually studied this will admit this, there literally would be virtually no musical culture without black people. Going back from slavery time forward, the list of musical genres that we invented, the old spirituals, gospel, hip hop, jazz, blues, and those are just the ones I can think of. In fact, I think somebody, and I had to research this. Somebody told me that like country music was started by black people, and I was like, really? But I haven't really researched that. Almost any musical genre you can think of in America was started by black people. Almost every musical genre, after it reaches a certain point, gets abandoned by black people as it gets infiltrated by non-black people. Weirdly enough, hip hop is the only, well, rap is the only musical genre that hasn't been abandoned, but the core of it has been changed so much that it has now become unrecognizable. You see how interesting that is? We haven't come up with anything, in essence, anything to replace rap music as part of youth culture in 35 years. You had other things come up alongside it. You had neo soul come up, which became, in essence, the young adult music for a while, into as people in hip hop started to grow into adults and needed a different way to express themselves, to express those adult emotions. Neo soul became that. D'Angelo, Erykah Badu, Jill Scott, those people, that group of people. And what's interesting is they were still part of the hip hop aesthetic, or some of them were brought out by hip hop artists. Or you have Erykah Badu, who would vacillate between rapping and singing and kind of float in between the genres. He's able to do both. Like Lauryn Hill was able to do both. But with all that, with all the talent of these various people and their ability to create and do different things, we have not replaced hip hop. We have not replaced, well, no, false. We have replaced hip hop. We've replaced hip hop. Hip hop has actually been replaced for us with rap. And so as time goes and the center of rap music changes to different places, from East Coast to West Coast, to down south, the spirit within it changes each time. And the sister says she can't stand the term neo soul. To me, it's different from soul music because of the hip hop aesthetic that's in it. That's why I make the delineation. It's not the same as old soul music to me, just because of the change of the times and what influenced it. But as time passes and it goes to different places that it picks up different things and different experiences, and it changes the rap. But why is it able to change the rap? It's able to change the rap because the rest of the culture of hip hop was left behind. The breakdancing is left behind. Now the DJing has been virtually left behind. Like vinyl records aren't. It's so weird. Well, we went through a period where vinyl records virtually disappeared, and now vinyl records start becoming popular again. So you didn't even have the tools to be a true DJ, which was the vinyl records and the turntables and the mixer. The graffiti as an expression of hip hop was left behind. So the core of what it was left behind and has mutated into something different. Now, up into what was called the golden era. In the late 80s, while Luke is coming up in the South and doing this thing, it's so interesting because in New York, you had a period of time where intelligence, wordplay, and knowledge and different black ideologies are being expressed all over New York. You have the rise of gangster rap on the West Coast, and then the bounce music and that whole related genre down south. So you have three different, what is becoming in essence, three different forms of music all under the same label. So really, in a way, it's a fight for the soul of hip hop, which will affect the next generation. Because the current generation at this time, people are depending on your age. You're either coming into your teenage years, your college years, or coming out of college if you're part of that whole generation. So this will determine the future of it, depending on as these artists grow, because these artists are young as well. Because we always forget people like Rakim and Ice Cube, Nas, and these people they're signing their record deals 19, 20, 21 years old. They're taking raps that they've written when they were 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. So this is truly youth oriented at the time. Because of Public Enemy's ability to say the things that they say and still sell records to white people because of the musical aesthetic that they used, and go around and sell out tours and tour with white bands and have white people wearing the Public Enemy logo and all this thing, which of course I believe that the very nature of Public Enemy changed with the ouster of Professor Griff, but that's another part of the story for another day. Because they were able to make knowledge and political rap commercially viable, they opened the floodgates for all the people that would come out. And then you literally had dozens, at minimum, in New York of 5%ers and a few Nation of Islam people and some African-centered people and some people that were with Dr. York's movement, whatever it was called at the time, because that thing changed over the course of time. And so you had all of these messages about blackness and being proud to be black and black empowerment and the black man is God and Africa this and all of this stuff going on in New York from, I'll say, 88 to about 92, 93. Wow, like I said, on the West Coast, gangster rap is growing. So you have Ice Cube leads them NWA, so you have NWA and Ice Cube, where Ice Cube had hooked up with Public Enemy. So he was kind of weaving political stuff, and he started to um, hang around with Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad. So he would have political stuff and gangster stuff, and literally had an album. One album was his death certificate album. Excuse me, was one album of gangster rap, and then one album of political hip hop. Yeah, double album. So you had him, NWA, DJ Quick, MC8, and so forth, so on. And then you get up into the Bay, and then you have Spice One and those other people, and then go all the way up to uh, Seattle. And I can't even think of the brother's name, but he had the song "My Posse's on Broadway," which I didn't understand because he was from Seattle, so I didn't get it. Still don't. Um, and then he had the Butt song. Y'all help me out with the title. All I remember, he said, "I like big butts and I can't lie," but he had a lot of slim European models in the video. I didn't understand that part, but whatever. I figured that the label had paid for them. So each region had their own stars, had their own style. Sir Mix-a-Lot, thank you. Um, had their own style, had their own thing. As this thing is expanding and growing, and then you had kind of like in essence, like a hybrid of hip hop and reggae and dancehall. That was popping. If you know, you know. Don't ask me any questions about me and dancehall. You will get no answers. Um, so all of this is going on, and but the thing about it is the only real commercial, only region I'll say, and Miss Africa Roots talking about Mad Lion Patra. She knows. I know she knows. Actually, I think Miss Africa Roots is a DJ, so she knows everything I'm saying. She knows. Um, there was only one region that was doing the political rap, and that's the thing we miss. So it was really only in New York for the most part, where you had, I guess, what would be called now conscious rap, and Jersey. Every other region, with the exception of Ice Cube on the West Coast, were doing something else. The something else that mostly everyone else was doing was degrading black culture. Even though it was unintentional, because you have people who are of a certain age, they don't even realize what they're doing. But if you look behind the scenes, all of them, well, most of them were influenced by European executives, like Dr. Dre hooking up with Jimmy Iovine, right? So Dr. Dre hooks up with Jimmy Iovine, but before that, he hooks up with Death Row, founded by Suge Knight and some other people behind the scenes, like I believe the gentleman's name David Kenner. And they go on to propagate this. They take the foundation of gangster rap set forth by Public Enemy and just try to push it to the limit. But the difference was, one of the things that they pushed was the misogyny, which NWA had, NWA and Luke had started, in essence, like really pushing it, but they really pushed it hard to the limit. It's different from Luke. Now, Luke was pushing misogyny. He was pushing, he was selling sexuality. I mean, he was selling, let's be honest, he was selling musical pornography in the grand scheme of things, because everything was about sex. But because Two Live Crew weren't particularly talented in making making music that would transcend their region amongst black people. It had an effect, but I don't think it had as big an effect as the West Coast. Because West Coast artists expanded nationally. MC8 expanded nationally, partially because of a movie. And remind me to get into the whole movie aspect of this thing too, because I meant to talk about that, and I completely forgot as I go through this history. Right? But the West Coast had a bigger effect. They had bigger artists, DJ Quick, and the whole Death Row thing with Snoop Dogg, which became huge, and is still a legend to this day. So, as that music, different forms started becoming commercially viable, where they're like, okay, we don't have to allow people to say whatever they want to sell records. The negativity will sell. Once it became obvious that the negativity will sell, and unintentionally, I believe, movies like Boys in the Hood help the negativity sell. Movies like Juice help the negativity sell. Movies like Menace to Society help the negativity sell. They gave a visual to and a commercialization of the dysfunction that was in the black community at the time. And the brother says, when did the music industry start investing in putting our people in prison? I believe, and I almost shouldn't answer the question because I'm not 100% sure, but I kind of believe that's something that took place in the late 90s. But I will have to really research that and take a look at it. I know Brother Genie talked about that in his genocide video. So I don't know if you had that video, brother, but he did talk about that. But it's been years since I watched it, actually. Well, it's been over a year since I watched it. So when Lord Vale says, "Don't forget Friday." Well, Friday was a little later. I'm talking about the ones that were there in the early 90s. And Sister Vanessa says the hats knew they had us when they saw how well negativity. So exactly. And I'm glad you said that too, so I can be sure to put this person, in the fire. We always have to, we forget NWA, they were local. The monetization and radio play and commercialization that they needed was provided by a hat, Jerry Heller, who said he did not like the music at the time. He said because it wasn't. He said it wasn't fun or it wasn't funny or didn't have comedy or something like that, which is false because Luke was already out, and some people thought Luke was funny. I never understood, and I know Luke said he was doing it for comedy, but I never understood. I never found anything funny about what he was doing. I never got it. I just wasn't vibrating on that level, as y'all would say. But yeah, if not for Jerry Heller helping to fund and make NWA nationally popular, they would have been local. But that is so deep because it's two things. They help popularize gang culture, right? Which was extremely detrimental at the time. Gang culture at that time was very deadly because we're talking about a time where crack, because crack had hit the West Coast first, and okay. Brother Dawood said the negative stereotype started with New Jack City and colors glorifying black on black crime. Thank you for bringing up colors. I forgot. Colors was huge and pushing and glorifying gang culture before NWA ever came out. And I got a chance to visit the West Coast when I was young, so I got to see how it was. And yeah, no, LA was crazy then in the 80s. It was crazy. Because they had, and I went in the mid 80s, they had weapons and money and that built in infrastructure of gang culture that made the West Coast different from everywhere else. It made it different. That's why the the crack and everything was able to flourish there, because you had what was in essence organized black organized crime, but the black organized crime wasn't used the way that organized crime was used for every other group. There's always been organized crime in America. America is an organized crime syndicate. It was founded as a really an organized crime syndicate because the idea was, okay, how do we take this land, which was a criminal act, but no one had written the laws against it. That was the only difference, right? So America's an organized crime syndicate. So if you look at every group that's coming to America as immigrants, they all have an organized crime base as their economic base. They all were doing something illegal. The Italians, right? I mean, how many mafia movies have we seen? No Italian can deny that. Yeah, the Jewish mafia, no one ever talks about the Jewish mafia. The Irish were different because they became the police, but they were organized crime because they were taking payoffs from the mafia. Mafias. You got the Chinese triad. Like, you name it. Like, the only people I can think of, I haven't heard of any Indian mafia group. As far as when I say Indian, whether we're talking about East Indian or so-called native people. That's like the only groups I can think of that didn't have mafia. Colors came out in 1988. I thought it was before that. I thought it was like 86. Okay. And so that the fact that all of the other groups, I mean all the other regions, excuse me, were for the most part pushing some form of negative aspect of black culture as they begin to gain a piece of hip hop. Sister Nina says, I grew up on the West Coast, but I was never about that life. Looking back at it now, I realize how horrible it was. It's so, we don't like, and Sister Nina, you can let me know if I'm wrong. From what I hear, we don't even realize the effect of all of the destruction of young black men in the 80s and 90s because of the gangs, to the point where the racial population in the Los Angeles, San Diego, that whole Southern California region has changed, because even though you had Mexicans and whatnot involved in gang activity, they're able to replace their numbers by simply coming over the border and repopulating that way. Whereas black people, the population has gone down. Like, people are telling me that Hispanics have taken over Compton, which I just found sad. But we never talk about how the proliferation and the commercialization of that form of negativity destroyed a generation or two of people in various regions. Different regions, it was worse. At West Coast, South Central, and all that L.A. area, it would it decimated them. They were having at the peak. L.A. was having over 1,000 murders a year for maybe a decade. That's 10,000 people. 90% of them young black men. We never talk about the effect of that. Now, of course, uh, we know now a great part of that was the United States government importing drugs into the black community. But that's another show, right? So while all this is going on around the country, oh, no question, sister, DC was bad, absolutely. DC was. I always tell people it's like I went and visited the West Coast and I came back and I had brought the West Coast with me to DC. That's what it felt like. But Miss African Roots, you from DC? I didn't know. I wasn't sure. So you remember places like Mayfair and Clifton and places like that. And Brother Dawood, he definitely remembers. Yeah, when I was in the nation, we went in some of those places. Well, we went a lot of those places. You know, early 90s. Try to help out our community. But as all these things are brought into and replacing the initial hip hop culture, and the commercialization takes place, and like I said, realizes that they can, sell the negativity. Then New York rap, which was what the foundation and the root of the positive aspects of hip hop, even though there were some negative aspects from the beginning, because Greek Bambaataa was doing Greek stuff. We may do a whole show. You know when I'll talk about that? I'll talk about that when we talk about the history of straight black pride movement. I'm gonna do a history of straight black pride movement show. Don't let me forget. Is Sister Misty in here? I don't see her. But Sister Misty, you hear this? Don't let me forget to do that show. Now I'll probably bring Brother Genie on for that. But then New York rap began to change, and New York rap kind of became instead of being the initiators and the innovators in a weird way, they followed behind other people to the point, and I just found it ridiculous, to the point that they end up having Bloods in New York. When I found that out, I was like, New York has lost its way. In the city, because the city has long been, we're just being honest, it's long been a cultural hub for black people, going back to Garvey's time, 100 years ago. Garvey, Malcolm, John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, Amos Wilson, like a lot of Leonard Jeffries, a lot of our greatest scholars walked those streets in Harlem. A lot of our greatest leaders did their work on those streets of Harlem. A lot of our greatest activists, Dr. Khaled Abdul Muhammad, were there in Harlem. So, being completely honest, New York has always been a hub and an innovator and a center of black culture, especially positive black culture. I mean, that's why you have the Harlem Renaissance, and that's what I meant to say. In a way, to me, hip hop at the foundation was a new age Harlem Renaissance, and had the potential to be that before the commercialization. The commercialization altered everything, and it allowed other people to play a role in what happened. And then at that point, that's where we got in. That's where we really got in trouble. because even though some of the artists were trying to express the things that they were seeing, the things that they were exposed to, the things they had grown up to, and were telling those stories, like people like Nas, who I believe came out in '82, Biggie come out, I mean '92, excuse me, Biggie come out in like '92, and those people, they didn't realize that they were helping to further push the culture in a negative direction. And the thing is, they were more talented than the other people who were pushing the culture in a negative direction, which means that they were able to bring in more people, and they were a younger generation than the people like Public Enemy who had been out previously. So you have people like Nas and eventually Jay-Z and these other people in New York who were, well, I know Nas was like 19 when he started. Mobb Deep they were extremely young, and in fact, Mobb Deep they changed their name and changed their whole style. And they were like, when I think of they signed, they were like 17, 18 or something. They went from trying to do the knowledge thing to doing the street thing. And as these artists did that, and then you have the rise of Bad Boy with Sean Combs, and then his connection, he gets in deep with Clive Davis, who, as Jaguar right about Clive Davis, now you have the artists, quote unquote, expressing themselves, but only expressing the negative aspects of what they see. You have the behind the scenes people, the money people, the people that's doing the promotion, the people that own the labels and things like that, seeing that this is something that they can benefit from. And then, of course, a large percentage of, because remember, I talked about Rick Rubin and Lyra Cohen and these people that they were there at the beginning. They're label heads now. They're on the executive level now. And a lot of these people already were children of influential people. That's how they were able to get in, because they already had the money. And now they're able to steer us in a negative direction for their benefit, economically, and to our detriment, culturally. Why? And why are they able to do that? Because you have to understand that as the hats gained a foothold and in essence took over commercially the whole the whole music industry, but specifically hip hop, because the way it was, it's something you had to be a part of for people to trust you. As they did that and they changed it, and we kept falling into the trap and pushing it, it sent the entire culture of black people into a negative spiral of decadence and death. What do you mean, DC? You can't blame that on hip hop. I can blame it on hip hop because it became the predominant youth. It became the predominant youth movement at this time into the late 90s for a second generation of people. To the point now where we are now is what? Young people who feel trapped in the quote unquote hood. What are the two things that they want to do that they feel can get them out? You want to play basketball? You want to rap? Well, if you're under 6 feet, probably not going to play basketball because they only select 50 to 60 people per year to join the NBA. And some of those dudes, like LeBron, seems to never retire. So it's not a lot of slots open. So only a certain amount of people realistically think they can do that. However, as we know, literally everyone thinks they can rap. And then you have the people that make beats. And then you have the people around it. But literally everyone thinks they can rap. And literally everyone will try it amongst young black people sometime in their life, especially young black males. All right? Now, the question is, now that we've gone through most of the history, and I want to get back to a seminal part that I feel is really, really set hip hop off on the wrong course. And it's so weird because it's something that should have woke up everybody and set us on the right course. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the murders of Tupac Shakur and Christopher Wallace. See, of course, if you're of a certain age, I don't have to rehash the beef between Biggie and Tupac, which was largely a one-way beef. The thing that's so sad about it is that Tupac was the son of a Black Panther and grew up learning Panther ideology as a young man. If there's any rapper who should not have been susceptible to going to war with another group of black people, it should have been Tupac Shakur. But because of his hectic upbringing, because his family was really under attack from the authorities, there were some things that there was some damage done to that young man. And he was able to be triggered by certain things. Brilliant. I mean, Tupac was, if you listen to him speak and listen to some of the lyrics, especially his old stuff like Brenda Has a Baby and something like that, really a brilliant brother, if we're being just completely honest. Which what made his volatility that much more dangerous. And like a true Gemini, he literally had two different parts of his personality. Do I think that the Tupac Biggie beef was a CIA psyop? I'll put it like this. God, I can't remember the name of the book. Someone did a real good book on Tupac. And I definitely believe that he was under surveillance and under attack by government forces for the large percentage of his life. And I believe he was aware of it to a certain degree. But being completely honest, talking to older Panthers, you never give yourself the credit that you deserve that to be a target from those people. You just you can't believe it. I'm gonna be completely honest. And if you've been doing race work, you have a dossier at the FBI. I'm just letting you know. Anybody here that's doing race work, you're on the radar. You may not think you're on the radar, but you're on the radar. I'm just saying. So much so, I remember my mother and my grandmother having a conversation, and my mother said that she knows that I have an FBI dossier. She has no doubt of that. Because I started doing race work a long time ago, last century. And here I am. Back again, doing the same thing. So to answer your question, I believe the beef was proliferated because of the media. If you remember the media back in the day, and then of course who controls the media. So remember this is before the age of social media. So we're talking about music magazines and different interviews and things like that. We forget how big, at least I do, we forget how big MTV was back in the day. We forget how big Source magazine became. And I don't even know who actually owned Source at that time. I have no idea. And there were these other magazines and rap pages and all this stuff. And then major magazines began to cover this thing and make it go even bigger because remember Tupac was delving into movies, so he's becoming a movie star. So that like Tupac in his Gemini-ness is literally living two lives. It's like this Hollywood artist guy and this part revolutionary, part gangster guy. At the most, at least for our generation, at basically the most volatile time of our generation up till now. You're like being the most volatile guy at a volatile time. Doesn't usually, it's easy for somebody to redirect you in the wrong direction. And like I said, it was largely one way beef. Biggie and Tupac were friends. That's why I put that's why the what they call it, the thumbnail picture is of them together. They were friends. When Pac got attacked, he blamed Big. Big was never able to. And who knows? I mean, it's New York. New York is grimy. Certain places in New York, I won't go by myself now, and New York is better than it was then by far. So just because something happens on your in your block or even in your building doesn't mean you knew, but nobody could tell Tupac that. Also, and let's be completely honest, doesn't mean that you didn't know. But I don't think I never felt there's a motivation for them to attack or allow Pop to be attacked. We just dealing with disorganization. A proper organization would have had what would have happened was that they would have called each other. He'd have said, I'm on the way. And Puffy and them would be like, all right, we're gonna send a couple of dudes down to meet you. And then he never gets shot and that whole thing never happens. That whole what became East Coast, West Coast beef never takes place. And as we know, eventually Tupac gets murdered. And he is murdered largely from my understanding. That people have a different understanding, you let me know. Let's see. And then our wonderful producer and the BB48 man giving me the information at the same time. Source was started by David Mays, a Jewish Harvard University student in Cambridge. Mays decided to hire his friends Jonathan Schechter and James Bernard. Okay. And there you go. And I'm gonna have to do a show if I can get by. I think I can. It's weird. I think I can say anything I want now because the channel's so small. But I'm gonna have to just do a show on how black talent is exploited and by whom. As we study the names, it becomes obvious the whom part. But I mean, we had to do a show on that one day. But so then, Tupac gets involved in the gang stuff. Gets involved in something, trying to represent for the people he was with, trying to show them love. What happened to help him get him out of jail? Because let's be real. Gets involved in that, gets murdered in Las Vegas. Sends shockwaves through the hip hop community. Biggie says, man, I wouldn't wish that on nobody because, you can't come back from death. Doesn't say anything inflammatory. Is generally shook by that. Right? What, less than a year later, Biggie gets killed in LA. Why he wanted to go to LA, what point they were trying to prove is beyond me. I blame that on Puffy Combs. Puffy could have said, no, we're not going to LA. Period. You my boy, I run the label, I ain't paying for you to go there, you're not going there. And at that time, Biggie had been in a car accident, he could barely walk, so you're not going to LA. Period. He didn't do that. But again, Sean Combs is a student of Clive Davis, so and people around Sean Combs have a habit of negative things happen to them and him moving on scot free. Call Shine Barrow and ask him about that. But I digress. So then Christopher Wallace is murdered in Los Angeles. And this should be a seminal turning point where we, as the hip hop generation that I'm claiming I'm a part of, because there was a time, and if Brother Dawood is there, he can tell you, time I thought I had some MC skills. But it's also about the time where I said, I don't, it's probably not something I'm going to do. Since Vanessa says Puffy is one of the biggest rats in New York. And that's saying something because there's some huge rats in New York, both literally and figuratively. But this was a time, should have been a time of reflection and a time of change of behavior and a time of remorse and sadness and grief and saying, hey, we're moving in the wrong direction. Let's do something different. And that didn't really take place. And Sister Farnessa said you need to see some of those MC skills. You will not see nor hear any of those MC skills. I'm sorry. But I will say you could always ask the brother one half of the Dead Prez. He'll tell you. And you're going to be like, what? Yeah, I knew that. I knew him. Back in the day. Way back in the day. But that's another story for another day. And so the Biggie Tupac thing happens. Then you have Big L around that time. I can't remember that exact year that Big L got murdered. Very talented MC. And then you have Jam Master Jay, who was a legend at this time. So instead of, it's incredible when I think about it, that doesn't make any sense. That shows how far we have fallen. Instead of us as black people, especially young black men, seeing the murder of two people that many people held in great esteem and saying, okay. And this was what's crazy when I think about it. This was after the Million Man March. When we pledged, I was there. Brother Dawood is here. He was there with me at the front at the beginning because we got there and it was still dark. Tell you those stories another show. Instead of us saying, wow, we pledged not to kill each other and to help raise our families and go back to our communities and better our communities. And man, these two dudes that we listened to and liked and they got killed and this is crazy and we need to stop. No, we don't stop. More killing and more killing. And we talk about killing. And we talk about the pimping. And we talk about orgies. And we talk about money and jewelry and robbing people. And it goes on and on and on and on. Death and destruction and death and destruction and death and destruction over and over and over and over and over for year after year after year after year after year. And then we look at our communities now and say, oh man, what in the world happened? Hip hop happened. We never grew up because of the hip hop, and the hip hop never grew up because of us. A brother said something that was so profound to me. Well, actually, I heard it secondhand. He said hip hop stagnated the growth and extended the adolescence of multiple generations of people. I found that so profound. And when he said it, I thought about it. I'm like, no, you know, when somebody throws something at you and you're in it, you're the target. It hits you. You can't duck it. You can't be like, I mean, some people you can be like, oh nah, that wasn't me. I couldn't say that. I thought about it. I was like, wow, I didn't realize. And then I'm talking as a person who had knowledge and had been doing work in the community and still was affected by it. So how much more is somebody affected that didn't have the knowledge? So give me give me 30 seconds, brothers and sisters. I gotta do something real quick. And I'm gonna make sure that I have the mic on when I come back, unlike last time, so we don't have 5 minutes of me talking and y'all can't hear me. We're not gonna make that mistake. All right? Give me 30 seconds. And I will be back shortly. I'm gonna have to get commercials for this show so I can talk as long as I want without interruption. But right now, I cannot do what I want to do. Give me a second. All right, I'm back. Can y'all hear me? Somebody's cracking jokes talking about you're counting. Ha ha ha. Gave just some more work for our wonderful producer to do to edit. But we missed the opportunity with that Biggie and Tupac thing to reflect and try to do something different. And now, here we are, looking at the desolation that's taking place and wondering what happened. And like I said, the hip hop happened. And it's something we have to look at. And one of the key aspects of it that we don't want to talk about, and we're going to do a show on this. And Sister Vanessa said it's painful to have conversations with dudes over 40 that still have that gleam in their eyes for hip hop. Yeah, I know. I mean, and I'll be completely honest. Of course, I have a certain love for hip hop because it was through hip hop, in essence, that I got the knowledge. You see? It was Rakim and then Public Enemy. But it was, in fact, I'll tell you when it was. When Rakim made Move the Crowd, and I saw the video for Move the Crowd, and I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, but I'll describe it. Because you have to understand, you're talking about a uh, preteen, preteen black boy watching this. Rakim made Move the Crowd. In Move the Crowd, Rakim was a general. He was a political candidate with a black, although light skinned wife. And he was a religious leader. He played these three people in the Move the Crowd video. The iconography and the imagery of seeing a black man in positions of power in a rap video, being depicted through a rap video, was extremely powerful to me in my young mind. That video said there are no limits to what you can be as a young black male. You can be a general, you can be a religious leader, you can be a politician, you can be an intelligence is cool. Achievement is cool. But remaining within your black culture, you can remain within your black culture and be cool and intelligent. A Wonderful Producer, Move the Crowd, 1987. Right. Had a phenomenal effect on me. Rakim is my favorite MC to this day. To this day. You know, he was saying stuff like, they measure me with the heat that's made by solar. Again, mind-blowing to a 12, 13, 14-year-old. Mind-blowing. Have you running to the dictionary? When Public Enemy came out, and they talking about supporter of Chesimard, I didn't know who that was. He talking about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, and all these. Again, see, people don't understand. There was no Google. You couldn't pick. First of all, you didn't have a phone. I mean, you had a phone in your house. That's it. A phone was to call people. And when your mama picked up the phone, you got off the phone. Or you might not be able to use it for a week. So you had to actually like go ask somebody or research or go to the library or something to find out who these people were. Nobody was just, unless your family grew up in the nation. Random people weren't just running around talking about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and at that time Minister Farrakhan and Khalid Muhammad and Huey P. Newton. And you wouldn't just walk down the street and somebody walk up to you and be like, hey, you heard of Huey P. Newton? Like, Huey P. Newton came back on the scene because he was assassinated. So, but I knew who he was before then, but, you know, that kind of put him back in the consciousness of people. Because it was a different era, you got information in a different way. Cable in the 80s, depending on where you live, that's when you got it. You didn't get it to the 80s. And Sister Simba says, I couldn't stand the changes of music rappers that curse so much and use the N-word. Okay, and I'm glad you said that. Haven't got to the N-word yet, because we're gonna have a whole N-word show one day. And our wonderful producer says her granny says she was running the light bill up using the phone. That's hilarious. That's funny. But let's get back to Sister Simba, and she agrees with me. Rakim's the best. Thank you, sister. But let's get back to the N-word, because we're gonna have an N-word show. So we're going there. We're gonna have a whole N-word show. We're going to irritate some people who think they're conscious. We do the N-word show. But today's not the N-word show. But we're going to talk about the N-word. Now, we can not, if we say that, or how can I put it? If we try to pretend like the N-word was not in use before hip hop, we'll be what? We'll be lying. Richard Pryor was not a rapper, and he was using the N-word to no end until he said he went to Africa, and somebody said, "Do you see any ends here?" And he said no, and he said he stopped using the word. But before that took place, he used the word a lot. Interestingly enough, people don't realize the amount of self-hate that Richard Pryor had came out of the fact that he was molested as a boy. His self-hatred was induced by molestation. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he grew up in a brothel, so he saw degradation prior to the molestation. So he suffered the degradation and the molestation, or as people would say today, the anti-blackness. I'll say the psychological and cultural dysfunction. That's what birthed him and his use of the N-word. Right? Now, he wasn't the only one, but I in a way, I feel like he popularized it because he was so huge and so big and was saying it publicly in front of the cameras, in front of Europeans. And they're just laughing their heads off. They probably can't believe it. They're like, oh, wow. This Negro is setting his people back 400 years. Ha, 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 ha. And for those of you all who know, oh man, what's my man's name? Paul Mooney. Go look at that roast of Paul Mooney done by Richard Pryor, and you see why I don't quote Paul Mooney or take him seriously. No, I'm not going there today. That's a discussion for another day. But we will go there. That maybe we'll get into Richard Pryor, and we'll get into Richard Pryor when we do the N-word show. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. But the proliferation of the N-word for our generation, I'll say, well, my generation, because I don't know the age of everybody here, it was literally made popular again by NWA. It was, and because they achieved commercial success, even though Public Enemy made a anti-N-word song, they were not, with their popularity, able to stem the tide of the N-word's popularity. Because I believe that people saw NWA as doing something new and being hard, and then people that wanted to project that image clung onto that word. And we don't want to admit it, it has detrimental effects. Let's be realistic. This is a word that many of our ancestors, the last word they heard before they died, before they were hung, while they were being raped, while they were being whipped, while they were being brutalized. That's where they heard the N-word. And all the other ways that they raped, tortured, and brutalized us. Throwing people over bridges, and the list of brutalization goes on. But what's the last thing they heard? Yelled with blood-curdling passion, the N-word. And then we sit here, dumb, brain-dead Negroes that we are, and we parrot them. And every time we say it, whether we want to say it or want to hear it or not, we're psychologically damaging ourselves and everyone around us. and giving clearance for other people to say it. Because what's the first thing? What do they say now? See, back in the day, they ain't say it because they were scared of us. But what do they say now? Well, I'm just quoting the song. Well, y'all say it all the time, right? Is that not what Europeans, especially European females, say now to these young, dumb Negroes that's dating them? And Sister Vanessa says one of our esteemed elders asked Tariq Nasheed to stop using the N word, and he made every excuse to continue doing it. Excuse me. You want to know a man's politics? Look in his bedroom. That's my response to that. Y'all know what it is. I don't say certain people's name because I don't feel like getting into back and forth and causing further division amongst the people, but y'all know what it is. And so that whole, almost like a hypnosis that they put us under with just beating the N word into our subconscious. And when they start beating the N word into our subconscious, later on, you would get people like DMX, who people would think of as masculine, saying stuff that sounds weirdly LGBT-ish, shall we say. Telling men in his rhymes to service him orally. This is supposed to be Mr. Hard Guy from New York. And, when I was young, if you said that to somebody, that's a fight. Yeah, that is just a fight. Ain't no, it's a fight. A man telling another man to service him, that straight to the hands. At minimum, somebody may get shot. Or you could have the fight and then the shooting. And we never, because we don't hear it. People like Biggie said suspect stuff, homoerotic stuff. And you're like, wait, what? She looks so good. What? Oh, hold up. And you would hear these things, and this stuff gets beat into our head, and we don't even realize we're hearing it. So the misogyny that we started to see from the 80s up, right? Which misogyny is what I call proto male homosexuality. You start hating women, what eventually happens? You hate women long enough, you start liking men because there ain't no other options unless you're gonna deal with bestiality. This is keep it 100, right? So now you have a new generation that comes up, and they don't hear any of the organic hip hop, and they don't hear any of the rap music that exists before the N word. If you're born in 1992, you're 27, 28 years old. You virtually never heard any music without the N word. Any rap music without the N word. In essence, you can be 30 and in the grand scheme of things, like if you take someone's mind developing it from 5 years old, where they kind of understand, begin to be aware of what's going on, you're 30 and under, 32 and under. You've never heard music without the N word. And the thing about hip hop that's so deep now is that now that it's become something negative, and because of what we talked about earlier, what it extends to adolescence, it also has now extended the negative trends. So sagging pants has just extended to the point that people from 50 to 20 are doing it. Even though Dr. Frances Cress Wilson told us about that in when the ISIS papers came out in, I believe, 1992. And what did Dr. Wilson say? She said eventually the pants would get so low that the men would step out the pants and then they would what? Put on dresses. Are we there yet? And Brother Dawood says the N word is not a term of endearment, but a state of mind endangerment and dysfunction. Absolutely. Because to address that, we don't want to accept that ends are a European creation in order to destroy black people. They took Africans and tried to make ends to be their servants eternally. So in essence, every time we say it, we're putting ourselves back into. It's like we're yelling slave at each other. And we wouldn't run around being like, "Yeah, what's up, my slave?" But we're doing it anyway. So putting ourselves psychologically in the slave mind state, engaging in the misogyny, which is the proto primitive form of homosexuality, and now men are wearing pants that they can't pull up, so they have to sag them. Jeans that look like tights, as our wonderful producer is saying. She said men are wearing jeggings. My God. Jeggings. That, oh man. I just had to process that and then shake my head. I'm shaking my head and scratching my head at the same time. I don't know if you can hear it. And, as Dr. Wilson told us, stepped out of the dress. Stepped out of the pants and wearing dresses. And we saw, for a brief moment, we saw various rappers of the time putting on, at best, questionable clothing, and one actor. Omar, I don't know if y'all remember, Omar Epps came out with a skirt on and tried to say it was a kilt. It looked like a skirt to me. It looked like a mini skirt. And then Puffy. And then what's my man from Brooklyn that came out in the late 90s with Talib Kweli? Most Def. He had a long skirt on. In fact, I think it was a long kente cloth skirt at that. And tried to say, "Oh, it's my African heritage." You're like, bro, that's not a loincloth. You're wearing a skirt. You're a skirt wearer. So we had that brief thing where we saw, tried to make that popular. And of course, it's so hilarious because what's the brother that made the Boondocks? He talked about it. He saw it coming. Wrote a whole episode of it, and then next thing you know, you see it in real life. Lord Bell, y'all seen Baby indeed. Thank you for that. I was struggling to come up with his name. And so I will say this. I will say while hip hop did not in and of itself destroy black culture, I will say that it was definitely instrumental in helping to extend the dysfunction of black people here in America. And now, unfortunately, around the world. This is my analysis. This is something that if we're going to be adults and we're going to advance and we're going to progress and grow, we have to examine on the table, can it be salvaged? And if not, then we have to create something different to replace it. And everyone's helping me with Aaron Magruder, who created the Boondocks. I remember when the Boondocks was a comic strip in the Source, weirdly enough, in the Source magazine. When the Source magazine was an actual paper magazine, I don't even know if it's still a paper magazine. And our wonderful producer said that it's still instrumental in pushing agendas globally. Indeed. And what's so funny is now they take and throw hip hop on stuff on dysfunction that is tangentially hip hop related, like the Love and Hip Hop set of shows. Now I've never watched them, and I didn't even understand why it was called Love and Hip Hop until people were telling me that like former artists were on the show, and I was like, oh, 'cause I had no idea. And for a while, I was trying to figure out where the young people were getting this new, the young sisters were getting this new what I call this new makeup style and hair and things like that. This new look, what I call the tranny look, because that's what it looks like to me. Because I grew up in an era where black women didn't wear a lot of makeup. Literally, makeup was a European female thing. Like sisters didn't wear a lot of makeup when I was growing up. Natural beauty, or at least a natural look, was a thing, even amongst stars at the time. I mean, they were wearing makeup, but Aaliyah looked natural. Jada Pinkett looked natural. Nia Long looked natural. Now, Beyonce doesn't look natural. Serena Williams, whatever she's done to her face, she looks more masculine since she got with that white man. Than you know, I don't know what's going on there. I don't even know who. I don't even like know who's supposed to be uh, um, hot or beautiful, or I don't even know who's supposed to be that now. Like who's supposed to be an icon? I don't know. All I know is I see on TV and social media and things like that a vast number of women who, as believe I said before, could rob a bank and then take the makeup off and go past the police and get away scot free because they're wearing so much makeup. They're creating another person. Like they don't even look the same. I've seen makeup jobs where it's just like if I didn't see the picture side by side or see the video of them applying it, I wouldn't believe it's the same person. Brother Lord Bell says Aaliyah was bad, and says Bria Miles is natural. I'm not sure I know who that is. Fill me in on who that is, brother. I mean, it's possible. I'm sure it's somebody I've seen, but the name's not ringing any bells. Let me know if she actress or Instagram or artist, musical artist or whatever. Cause I don't know. Excuse my ignorance. I'm reached that age where my mother says I'm not the target audience anymore. She used to always say that about new stuff. Now I'm of the age where I'm not the target audience anymore. Popular culture doesn't care what I think because they don't think I gonna be spending money willy nilly, which is correct. And somebody, I missed somebody's comment, but somebody said that in essence we need to throw hip hop out and start something new. And that's gonna be the difficult task because we've been locked into it for so long. And now, being completely honest, the rap that we have now is not it bears very little relation to the original hip hop, but it still has control over our young people to the point that we see the death and destruction that I talked about, going all the way back to Tupac and Biggie in that era. Lord Bell says she is a model. She's a model in my generation, and Unique One says she's a model, actress, and video girl. Wow, it didn't even occur to me that video girl still existed. Oh, okay. Um, okay. But the brother says she's natural. Okay, interesting. I had to look her up and see. Um, but yeah, the dysfunctional part is what we still have. So we had, I think we had like recently there have been 2 or 3 different rappers murdered. Now I saw a lot of people talking about King Von. I'm not gonna lie, not familiar with him at all. Haven't heard any of his music. I heard people say that he had music that was glorifying violence and drug dealing and so on. I'm not sure because I don't listen to his music. But if that's the case, for everyone to act like they're surprised that he was murdered, and the fact that he got in a physical altercation that someone that he apparently had beef with and went and assaulted the man, we can't be surprised. But that's a continuation of the things that have taken place. And let me acknowledge that I was sent a nice chunk of change via Cash App from one of the sisters. And it's funny because I was going to say that the brothers have, because somebody asked me, but I believe it's Sister Nina. So salute to Sister Nina. I appreciate you. Thank you for your support. But Sister Nina has kind of evened up the score between the brothers and the sisters because the brothers were out donating the sisters. But I greatly appreciate this. I want to give Sister Nina a shout out. And I don't know, one of these days I might get a logo design and make some DC Radical 1 t-shirts. Y'all tell me. If so, I'll give a couple free to the people that always support, whether it's those that support here, support the center, or those that support the Instagram. Because I got a lot of people who repost stuff on Instagram, but they don't listen to the center for whatever reason. It is what it is. And Sister Cindy says she was known for real husbands in Hollywood. I didn't know that. I didn't even know that was a thing. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know real husbands in Hollywood was a thing. Well, shows you how out of the loop I've been. I had to laugh at myself, not having a clue. And Sister Fonessa says was not familiar with King Von. Yeah, so, and I saw a lot of outpouring of love for King Von. And Sister Nia says she appreciates it, obviously, because you donated, and I appreciate that. It's fantastic. Like literally, it means a lot because when you do stuff like this, you don't do it for financial or monetary gain. And I never thought, in being realistic, allow me to go off on a tangent a little bit. And when we get to the 2.5 hour mark, that's when I'm gonna close this out. But you're never sure people will find value in what you do. Greetings, Spirit, Mind, Character, Soul has decided to join us. You're never sure that people will find value in what you do. And I'll be completely honest. When I came back to this movement, if you had told me at that time that I would be doing initially doing radio through on the wake up radio or doing YouTube, I I would have laughed if you had told me that I would be on stage doing lectures and teaching people. I would have I would have doubted that because in my mind, the people who did that were Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, Amos Wilson, Dr. Khaled, Steve Coakley. Those were the people who did that. And people like me sat in the audience and took notes and went to find the books that they talked about and things like that. So it never really occurred to me, especially when I was younger and seeing Dr. Khaled, you know, early 20s or whatever. Actually, first time I saw him, even before that, but I guess I was still a teenager. But it never occurred to me that I would. It's so funny. Even in the foot soldier in the nation days, the idea of speaking from the rostrum wasn't a real thing to me. The idea that I would have something valuable to give to the people intellectually, even 8, 9 years ago, wasn't really a real thing. It was only when I got on social media and seeing how much information and knowledge and wisdom that people had lost from Dr. Khaled the time of his transitioning to the time I really got on social media, that I only began to speak about certain things that I had experienced, and then people gravitated to it. The young people gravitated to it because they missed it. They didn't hear it. No one was telling them. The people my age gravitated to it because it reminded them of what they had lived and did, So that's why any support, whether it's financial, whether it's reposting, whether it's commenting on social media, whether it's coming to events, any of those things, I greatly appreciate them because it's not something that I saw happening. And the fact that you would have had to work very hard to convince me that would be something that would take place. Now, getting back to the subject at hand, we find ourselves weirdly with a new generation, but in the same place. They're having their Tupacs and Biggies, except they're having it for extended periods of time with multiple sets of rappers. And one time I was on YouTube and I actually was speaking about hip hop. And one of the videos came up and it was talking about, and this has actually been about 4 or 5 years ago. So this is before King Von and before what's the brother in LA? I'm drawing a blank. The brother in LA was killed recently that everybody showed a lot of love to when he was murdered. And I don't think we actually ever got down to the bottom of that situation, but in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter. But I looked at a YouTube video and they were showing all of these rappers that had been killed. And even though some of the people were local and things like that, it was still it was amazing to me. And I saw it and I was like, this thing has become a culture of death. It attracts death. And it attracts death because the subject matter so many times is death. Shooting, killing, drug dealing. Thank you, Louisville, Nipsey Hussle. Shooting, killing, drug dealing, abusing women, so forth and so on, add infinitum. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. To multiple generations. So much so that we have been reprogrammed for a new self hate and self negation and self murder and self destruction. Yeah, Pop Smoke got killed too. I forgot about that, man. Goodness, it's so many people. I just get lost. And Daniel Davis says gang culture was imported to the South through rap music. Yeah. And it's so funny because gang culture, like people, no one talks about it, but gang culture transported itself into the Midwest because of the amount of money that they were making dealing drugs. The Crips and Bloods end up in places like Nebraska. So we'll do it. Y'all want me to do a show and outline that whole thing with CIA and cocaine and everything like that? Let me know. I had to go back in the archives because I got books on that. That's something I'll have to get into like next year. Unless, of course, I don't have to do these lectures upcoming, then I won't. And our wonderful producer said Lil Boozy got shot yesterday. Really? Well, there you go. And what's so funny is that there's a whole I got to a point where I just couldn't relate to the hip hop anymore. I couldn't listen to it anymore. And so there's a whole era that I miss. Like when the South really took off, like people like Boozy and Jeezy and some of these other people. I missed it. I wasn't listening. I didn't, I missed these dudes. I barely caught the whole T.I. thing. So when they were doing their thing and becoming big, I wasn't even listening to the music. Like when Nas, it's so funny when Nas said hip hop is dead. I was like, I concur. I already felt that. Hip hop is dead. Rap music is the rotting zombie corpse of hip hop, propped up by our enemies and used to attack the minds of our youth. And this is from someone who wanted to be an MC. But the analysis is what it is. And so now we have multiple generations who are locked in adolescence, and it manifests in a way that we can't get along because, well, especially at a time where relationships start breaking up and people don't have parents, you're modeling the behavior of what you see on TV and hear through the radio. And the thing that's so deep is, even as rappers from my generation start to get married and have children and families, and nobody talk about that. Nobody wrote rhymes about that. Like LL Cool J, I think I talked about this before. LL Cool J's been married. I don't know how long he's been married. Snoop Dogg's been talking about he's been married almost as long as he's been talking about pimping. And our wonderful producer Cindy Ashby says Boozy was in Dallas to attend the funeral of friend and fellow rapper Mo 3. Yeah, I heard about the murder of Mo 3, who, I'm not gonna lie, I had not heard. I didn't know who he was. The young man's murdered. Somebody going to attend his funeral, and they get shot. And then the bad part is, the worst part is, the part that infuriates me, even though I understand why, no smoke for Urugu whatsoever. And Spirit Mind Character Soul says, I missed the prominent emergence of trap music out of Atlanta. Indeed, I did. By the NOLA had secured deaf culture, ushered in by Texas and Cali. Yeah. Now I remember when New Orleans came on the map with Master P. So I do remember that. I do remember when Birdman and his crew came on. But yeah, the whole trap music. Yeah, thank you. The whole trap music thing. That's what I missed. I missed that. So I mean, we. I mean, at this point, whatever romanticism we have with it from the essence for those of us in our generation, especially if you grow on the East Coast. I mean, it's probably foundational to your life with a young male, young female. I mean, I remember when I remember when Roxanne Shante came back and fired back uh at UTFO. Now I'm revealing my age now. If you're under 40, you're gonna have to go Google UTFO and Roxanne Shante. I remember when MC Light first came out. I remember when Queen Latifah first came out. I remember I remember when the quote unquote the real Roxanne came out, which was some Puerto Rican shit. I man, all this stuff was happening. It wasn't even a teenager, but all this stuff was exciting, you know, to hear. But that was before the music had taken this turn towards destruction. And I don't even know if there's anybody who's a major artist. And Spirit Mind Character Soul said her she said her dad had those cassette tapes. Thank you, Spirit Mind Character Soul. Trying to make me feel old. Oh yeah, my dad listened to that. Thanks. That's so funny. I I've lost most of my cassette tape collection. And anyway, but with what our wonderful producer just put up, I mean, it's this thing is not beneficial in any way, shape, or form, and I believe that because of the way the music works and the way that it can plant ideas into your subconscious mind through repetition, it could definitely, without question, be a positive outform. Positive art form. I don't know what I was saying, and could be a revolutionary tool for our people. And anyone, and Lord Bell says, when I was young, all I had to listen to was T.I., DMX, Gucci Man, Young Jeezy, Jay Z. Wow, my bad. That's our fault. Sorry, we left you with that. That's not a lot of positivity out of that. DMX was certainly. I mean, DMX was on drugs, so he was just talking out the side of his neck, as we used to say back in the day. And That's weird. My character so say young parents. She'll be 37 in January. Really? Okay. All right. I had young parents too. But so I just wanted to go through that and really talk about that because really the whole King Von thing really kind of stirred it, and I saw the reaction of people, and it was almost like a here we go again thing. So that's what sparked this conversation. Moving forward with the show, I mean with the DC Radical One page, what I plan to do is one thing I plan to do is for those that did not see the old or the previous, excuse me, the center radio shows, I'm going to release one of the old ones on the DC Radical One page, probably once or twice a week. In addition to that, I am going to do some shorter analysis of newsworthy events for black people, like things that are happening in the black world, whether here or on the continent. So those are the plans. So be on the lookout for that. For those who have subscribed to the DC Radical One page, you'll be probably be getting notifications of things. Some of them will say premiere, and they won't be actually new, but they will be releases of the older shows that I know a lot of people missed. And then some of them will be premieres. There'll be new things. I will look to get a little more visual, and I'll do some news analysis on newsworthy events that are happening in the black world. Like, been a massacre going on in Ethiopia for a while, and I really need to get some information on that and see what's the root of that and what's going on with that. So that's just an example. Actually, there's a lot of stuff going on in the African world, and of course, I'll definitely be talking about this election as it moves forward. Of course, here in Washington D.C., we had the Trump people come out. Um, I went to I left the city. I went to try to have some fun. I left the city, went to the county, and because of this COVID thing, and because they're changing, we're going back to like a modified phase one or something in PG County. I haven't heard anything about DC proper. Um, I wasn't able to do the stuff that I had planned to do to have fun because almost everywhere you went there was a waiting list, which just you know throws spontaneity out the window. So if we start heading back towards lockdowns, which I think we will when Mr. Biden comes into office, because I do not believe that those in charge will allow this election to be overturned, even though there is a lot of evidence that everything was not on the up and up, which, of course, America likes to talk about how great it is, but we know corruption runs rampant in this place. And Sister Fonessa says, is Jenny going to reboot his broadcast as well? Um, Genie is working on his own platform, and he'll be doing some things with his platform when it is ready, which appears to be probably a January 2021 goal, I think. Last time I talked to him. And I'll keep you updated. Before the end of the year, I'll have him on here. So we'll do an interview with him, and then he can take some of y'all questions and everything. We'll do it like that. And Spirit, Mind, Character, Soul, thank you for reminding me because I wanted to get to that. So, I always have a thing where I like to offer solutions. So I just told you how far hip hop has fallen, how it's degraded and falling by the wayside, and it's helping destroy our people's mind, blah 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 blah, for the last almost 2.5 hours. So I do want to at least point you in the direction of some positive music that if you listen to this show, you will probably like. And some brothers out of New York, United Front, the Vanguard United Front, and they also have a new member, relatively new member from, I believe, Milwaukee. You definitely want to check out United Front or the Vanguard United Front. They still have music on YouTube. In fact, I think it's still public, but I have a playlist of some of their videos on my DC Radical One page. Check them out. Check out, I believe they have a website. Sister, let me know. They have a website. And check them out, support them. If you want that hip hop feel, but you want some positive energy with it, definitely check them out. And sister, of course, is saying Kawa Soul Singer, who from here, right here in Washington D.C. You have seen him at some of our events. Um, sometimes Kawa just shows up at our event, and then of course I have to cajole him to get on the mic and perform. The brother really has amazing talent, beautiful voice. Very man, Kawa's a great brother. I mean, he's just a great brother. Have a lot of respect for him as a man. He's a father. Yeah, Kawa's a great brother. Maybe I'll try to get him on one day. He be doing big things, so it's kind of like, you know, if you have a friend that's doing, and I consider more of acquaintance, but if you know somebody and they doing big things, you see him and you're like, man, my man's doing big things, and you congratulate him. You try to catch him when you can. Sister Farnessa says United Front should be a group that should be mainstream. Oh no, there's a reason why they're not mainstream. That spirit of if the spirit of United Front got into our young people, things would change overnight. And sister says Cyrock, yeah, Cyrock is great. I met Cyrock. Cyrock's one of the nicest people I ever met in my life. I was shocked by how nice and cordial she is. She's also from DC. I believe she's from Southeast, if I'm not mistaken. She's a really, really wonderful sister. Sister Simba saying Richard Raw is a positive rapper out of Delaware. Okay, I'm not familiar with him. So I mean, the thing about it is, there's always artists trying to make positive music and trying to go against the grain of the negativity, and that's the thing about black people. Black people, we always have resilience. We're always resisting. We're always trying to do the right thing. There's always going to be a strain of black people who do that. And the European, they know it. If you watch the movie The Matrix, that's what it's kind of about. And as black people, we will continue to, as Dr. Collins said, we will continue to resist to exist. And that's what we're going to have to do. And part of that resistance is coming up with new music, new genres, and new styles of clothing, and the reestablishment of our culture, our base culture. The base culture of black people is black men and black women working together. That's the foundation of everything that black people are. It's the foundation of our spirituality. It's the foundation of our knowledge. It's the foundation of our culture. It's the foundation of everything that we do that makes us black people at the very root. As long as we maintain that foundation and we get back to that foundation and get back to propagating that foundation, we will be successful. We will win. Sister say Oshun is another one, feminine positive rappers. But as long as we do that and we continue to resist, I believe that we will win. And that's the goal, is to win and to reestablish ourselves as the dominant force on this planet as we were before. So with that, brothers and sisters, I'm going to close this out. Again, I thank everyone for their support and the multiple ways that they support. Do me a favor, share the links, let people know about. Oh, 777-9311 came in right towards the end. Let people know about the center. Let people know about the DC Radical One YouTube page. Let people know about On the Wake Up Radio. And just to let y'all know, I actually have to talk to Jenny about this because they changing the restrictions in the area. But as of right now, the Irritated Jenny's lecture on December 5th is still on. If I hear anything different, I will let you all know. I do not currently have a copy of the flyer, and I'm not sure if that's because I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but I do not. But as far as I know, the event is still going on. The only thing is tickets will definitely be limited, as they have been since we've begun doing things in the post-COVID world. But straight black pride is still straight black pride. We'll still be doing things to fight against the homophile assault and the onslaught of our various many enemies. And as I said before, we will continue to resist to exist. So again, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at dc.radical1. Also follow me on Twitter at dc_radical_ONE. That's at dc_radical_ONE. Also, don't be afraid to donate via Cash App at $DC Radical 1, all one word. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the DC Radical 1 YouTube page, which is capital D, small c, Radical, the numeral 1. And since Vanessa says he sent out the flyer via email. Okay, cool. Guess I need to check my email then. So, with that, brothers and sisters, thank you all again for all the support. Special shout out to Sister Nina for her monetary donation. And with that, I'll say a BB for Hodie and straight black pride.